Our next guest is Gershon Baskin. He's a former hostage negotiator and the Middle East director of the International Communities Organization, joining us now. And I want to talk about your latest piece about the sort of current strategy with regard Israel. But let's just start with the very latest on these negotiations, because as we understand it, the US, Israel, Egypt and Qatar will be meeting in Doha on Wednesday to try and effect some sort of progress in these ceasefire and hostage talks. You can say we've been here before. We have, lots and lots of times. Do you see anything different today, this week, about where we are at with regard to ceasefire?
Like Becky, there is a major difference right now, and that's in the apparent Hamas concession that they're willing to enter into the first phase of the ceasefire agreement that President Biden talked about a month ago, which would be a 6-week period, without having upfront an Israeli obligation to end the war. Apparently, from what we understand, Hamas has been assured by Qatar and by Egypt, probably with backing from the United States, that once the 6-week period began, even if they failed to reach an agreement on phase 2, the ceasefire would continue and would become sustained or permanent. This is what Hamas is believing, but of course the Israeli government, the Prime Minister's office in particular, have put out announcements that contradict the idea that the ceasefire would be permanent, or that an agreement could be reached on the other sensitive issues that are under negotiations.
And we've had these contradictory statements, I have to say, from both sides as we have moved through these months worth of, negotiations which have started and stalled and started and stalled. In your very latest piece, let's talk about that. You are very clear about how you see the current strategy, the current Israeli strategy, as a failed one, saying, and I want to quote you here, Israel's so-called leaders in the coalition and the opposition would like us to believe that Israel must live by the sword forever or perish. What do you believe it will take, or perhaps you will tell me that you are now seeing evidence of a move away from this strategy and narrative?
No, I don't think we have a move away from it yet, but what we need to recognize is that after more than 100 years of Jews and Palestinians killing each other in this land, at the end of this war, which is the worst of them all, there will remain 7 million Israeli Jews and 7 million Palestinian Arabs living on the land between the river and the sea, and this must be the last war between them. We have the possibilities of regional agreements, a regional defense pact that appeared on April 14th when Iran attacked Israel. Suddenly, Israel's neighbors came to the defense of Israel. The resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict can be done in a regional accord that would provide greater security, stability, and chances of economic development and prosperity for us all. We need to get rid of our leaders, both in Israel and in Palestine, and we need new leaders who are willing to look at the future for the first time with the idea that each side must recognize the right of the other side to live here in peace and security, that they all have a right to self-determination, that we have a place in this land together. And the two-state solution is back on the table in front of us. And I think we will see more countries coming out and recognizing Palestine. Everyone should recognize Palestine. Everyone should recognize Israel. We need the world to help us put this conflict to an end.
Well, Gershon, you may be right in suggesting that we should, we may see more countries come out in favour of Palestinian statehood. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been accused by politicians in Israel of linking a hostage deal to his tenure as Prime Minister and sabotaging talks thus far. Aside from publicly calling him out, what recourse is there to move this deal forward if that really is the Prime Minister's thinking?
Right. It seems that the Prime Minister is putting his own personal political interest in front of the interest of the countries. and more Israelis are taking to the street, calling for new elections and calling for Netanyahu to resign. We're witnessing cracks within the coalition. It's not a very stable coalition right now. There's another 2.5 weeks of this Knesset session before they go for a very long recess. And there are going to be marches of hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets. We only need 5 members of Knesset, of the 125 or the 64 members of the coalition, to vote against the coalition to bring the government down. The people of Israel, the majority, a large majority of Israelis, want elections and no longer have confidence in the leadership of Netanyahu. And that's our strongest possibility of seeing change in this country. The people here no longer trust Netanyahu. He's responsible for what brought us to
argue
October
that there
7th,
are polls suggesting
and the failure of Israel to protect us.
Gershon, let's be quite clear here. Benjamin Netanyahu will be clear that there are polls suggesting that there are many Israelis who want him still as prime minister and support his leadership at this point. Be that as it may, he is due to go to Washington in the next week or so. In Washington, he will come face to face, we are told, with Joe Biden in a meeting, a president who is looking increasingly weakened at home. What leverage does the US still have over the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu?
Yeah, I'm afraid that after the debate between Trump and Biden, there's lessening ability of the United States to put pressure on Israel. Nonetheless, the United States is Israel's most important ally, and Israel could not conduct its war in Gaza without the continued support of the United States. But I think that Netanyahu, when he addresses both houses of Congress, is actually going to be speaking above the heads of Congress and speaking to Mr. Trump and winking to him and saying, listen here, I'm not the weak person that you thought I am. I'm not going to give in to terror. I'm the person who's going to stand up to Hamas. And I think this is what we're really going to see in Congress. I don't think that Netanyahu is really going to be speaking to Biden or the current administration. They're going to be looking post-November.
Good to have you, sir. And you can find